Hey everyone, I'm here. It's Tsukihime time. My god, I can't believe this actually came out. I have no idea where in the video this is gonna go, but just in case you're curious, across this entire video, this was the first thing filmed. The reason I'm filming this first is because I actually have the physical copy here. Now, get this out of the glare here. If you've followed the news on this thing, you've probably heard that there's a difference between the two. And one of the things I'm hoping to do in this video is actually compare them. Obviously, I probably couldn't put it on screen, but I can give you like page number and a general, as spoiler-free as I can keep it, description of the differences. Here's the problem. I've only got the PS4 version so far. The Switch version is still on its way. And no, I didn't just order the Switch. I don't have... Well, actually, I am going to have 2 copies of the Switch version. But part of the reason I ordered 2 is because, A, I wanted the PS4 version. Because just to have it look nice next to my copy of Mahotsukai no Yoru. But B, because I'm also getting I bought the Switch version for my brother. And that's the one that's not here yet. So he'll be getting the Switch version. I will just be switching out the books. It actually works better that way because if my parents see the books, it's easier to explain the censored version than the non-censored version. But I have seen the censored artwork online, so I'll know which page it is. But yeah, let's get this thing opened up. I'll start the unboxing here, and then you'll know when we've moved into the scripted actual review. I'll put timestamps for sure on this. All right, so what we have here, top-down view. Hopefully you guys can't see anything I don't want you to see. So I'm just going to get this plastic off here. So, plastic was slightly torn here. That could have been me, but I'm hoping it didn't affect the box at all when it arrived. I don't see any dings on the box. I have had a collector's edition show up where the box is a little bit dinged. There's a little bit of a ding here. It's unfortunate, but I'm not that stingy. I'm not going to be, like, raise hell against where I got this. Oh, yeah, and the back of the box here, just some of the CGs. Beautiful CGs, mind you. But, yeah, so at this point, actually, full context here. I know what's going on in this one especially. Because at this point, I've actually read up through the Arcueid at the time of filming this. By the time we get around to the Switch version and we have that in our hands, I might have even beat at least one ending of the Ciel route. Okay. Come on. Come on. Oh. Here it is, the controversial book. Put this to the side for a minute. This is a lot more bare bones, I think, than the Mahotsukai no Yoru set. It's what it says. Oh, that's nifty. If you pull this out, you actually get... You could see some of the death lines that Shiki can see in the game. And then the moon. This is actually really neat. Just get this up for the camera so you can see it. If you can't read it here, it just says just how beautiful the moon is tonight. I'm happy to have this. Very happy. I'm sure there's nothing on the back here, but it's a neat little setup. Honestly, more than I was expecting for the inside of the box. I don't think Mahotsukai no Yoru did anything quite that elaborate. So, open up the game here. More fighting plastic. So, game's loose. That seems to happen every time I get a game. I think that might just be standard. Maybe it helps reduce damage. Pretty normal inside here. Nothing crazy. And the outside is not quite the same artwork. You have some different CGs here. Alright, but this is the important bit. This is the bit that got everybody mad. I don't think this is going to be nearly the quality of the Mahotsukai no Yoru art book. The Mahotsukai no Yoru art book was actually kind of impressive. This one, I'm expecting it to be alright, but the Mahotsukai no Yoru one contained an actual short story. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So it actually has a 1 on there, so I wonder, because obviously there's only one of these, I wonder if this is, when the second one comes out, if it's just going to have a 2 for the material. Just flip through this, not give enough sign. Oh, that's nice. They actually have maps here of the actual city that the entire game takes place in. So it's not quite just an art book. It's got like actual framing things for this. It's actually kind of useful. Like, I would love to actually, well, since I'm storing the Ciel, I might pull this out and actually use this to reference where the characters are at. It's like an actual city map. Try to do this without spoiling you guys. Don't micromanage. Don't micro look at this. Ooh. This is a really good map here. I'm actually happy they have this. This is the kind of shit I like to have around if, because I do the D&D campaign for FGO. If they ever do a Tsukihime collab and they're at the mansion, boom, scan that on my scanner. Okay. Let's, so the CG's here. Beautiful. Okay. I need to be a little careful. I know there's spoilers in here, so only want to show off what's good. So I actually went in that on the reverse side. I was going backwards manga style. Okay. Actually, I might have been, yeah, manga style. Table of contents here, all the characters. Oh, okay. They have a glossary. See, look, why visit the Type Moon Wiki when you have the material book yourself right here in front of you? Just pull out the material book and use the glossary. Actually, is this built to be... Oh. So that's not a glossary, or that's not a... that's not the table of contents. That's actually just all of the chapters of the actual story. All right. I just saw the day that goes on. All right. So yeah, that's the PS4 version. Of the Switch version, it should be mostly the same outside of that one censored page, but I'll check for more. But I'll pull that one out and rip it apart once we have that in front of us too. So, future Knickknack, take it away. So moving on, now on a completely different shirt, on a completely different day. Actually, fun fact for anyone that recognizes the shirt I'm wearing, I am just getting off the stream. Today is the FGONA anniversary at time of recording. I did get art for people who didn't tune in. I got her pretty quickly, though I did try to go in again and get an NB2 copy of her after stream and failed pretty miserably. But anyways, it's not the point today. So, yes, we have this was the PS4 version. Now I have the Switch version with me here as well. This version's going to my brother later, though I'm going to be doing something a bit sneaky. Because the Switch version and the PS4 version, as I brought up last time, there's some censorship going on the PS4 version. Now, previously in the last recording, I actually did record a segment that I hope I remember to remove, where I showed the page that was censored. That was a bad idea. I forgot about that. I forgot how big of a spoiler that actually was. So that won't be in the video, or I might include it in the video, but it'll be at the very end. But now then, without any ado, let's go ahead and I'll just open her up. So I'm gonna be honest here, actually, just comparing them side by side. I actually prefer the Switch's box. I wanted the PS4 version just because that's what the version I have of MiHoYo. It's gonna match when I have them side by side. But the box here, the artwork is just much wider, as the PS4 version, for some reason, felt the need to narrow it down like it's a PS4 box. I think if I were to look at the Switch box, this is how Switch boxes are laid out too. But the artwork just looks much nicer here on the Switch version. That, just as a whole, I think this might be zoomed in a little bit more. This is zoomed out. But it's just nicer to have that front of the box. But the back of the box, largely the same. CG's here. Though, I guess the boxes are... Yeah, no, it's slightly different. I guess this is just what the PS5 or PS4 boxes and the Switch boxes have on the back, too. So there's slight formatting differences. Doesn't make much of a difference here. I'll just remove both box covers here, and... Yeah, we'll just do them both here at the same time. So last time earlier we looked just at the PS4 version. Now I'm going to have the PS4 version and the Switch version side by side. And as before, we have the booklet here. This one's probably a lot more dangerous to show on screen because the PS4 version kindly pre-censored all that for us. But the Switch version, there is just a straight nude character within the manual here. Oh my gosh, this is plastic's fighting me today. So if you're crazy like me and you're doing what I'm doing, where you're switching the manuals for the version you want, then this probably won't change much for you. Because the manuals look like they're the exact same. It's interesting to have both of them, because technically they are two distinct art books with slight differences. I'm interested to see if they'll use the censored artwork again. Because like in something like Melty Blood, where you can't necessarily use the canon design for that character. Not sure they ever will, but it's interesting. I still don't know why they had to censor that. It's not censored in the game on either version. So, real quickly, not going to give you guys, actually show this off to you guys, but if you're curious, the censored artwork is on page 19. Oh yeah, that is a lot more, I see where it was censored now. But just because I'm a man of culture. So these are the art books. We got to see the PS4 version, so I'm just gonna slide the swapped out art book into the PS4 version. And slip the PS4 version away sneakily. No one will ever notice. But otherwise, I believe the art books are the exact same, other than that one image. And then we have the Switch version. I'll open her up here. My brother won't mind. Same background there. Though I have to wonder, now I want to go pull out the PS4 version again. Is the moon here the same size or slightly smaller on the PS4 or on the Switch version? It might be the case that it's smaller. My God, plastic. Why today? Only when I'm recording is plastic this hard to get off. Yeah, same thing here. You have the little the Tsukihime cartridge, which is interesting. I never got to see the MiHoYo cartridge because I just downloaded it to my Switch. Which, by the way, I'm going to bring it up in the review section here as well. But there are some performance differences on the Switch. I found that the Switch version, towards the end of the game, towards the end of the final route in a major scene, occasionally struggled to keep up with the scene, which is crazy for a visual novel. It might be a memory leak issue, so if you're playing the Switch version, just be sure you are periodically rebooting the game. Otherwise, you might find that you have the same problem I have. Oh, I didn't even notice. That wasn't intentional. That wasn't intentional. I swear to God, that wasn't intentional. Yeah, no, I didn't notice that there when I opened the PS4 version before. Oh my God, I hate that. I hate that. Come on, PS4 version. Yep. That's on both of them. I just didn't see it the first time. I'm refusing to say that phrase again. I downright refuse. Just while I have the box open, yeah. So, if it matters at all to you, yes, I can now confirm the Switch version's moon, or not the Switch version, the PS4 version's moon is much bigger. It covers the entirety of the box space. The Switch version does as well, but the Switch boxes are just smaller, as a matter of being. Alright. So that's all I needed the Switch Collector's Edition for. This is going to go off to my brother. Now on to you, future Knick-Knack, because I haven't recorded the review yet. And I'm not recording it tonight, so you'll see me in a third shirt. So, before I begin, I'll say this now. Later in the review, there will be spoilers. I'll try to keep it as spoiler-free for this first section, but later I will be covering spoilers, so just be warned. As well, I'll be linking it in the pinned comment, but I did take notes on my thoughts periodically as I read. They came out extremely long, so if you're curious to my mostly blind thoughts, feel free to take a look at those. Spoiler in those for sure, though, obviously. So we're finally here. Tsukihime is in English. It's now a reality, and it's glorious. 3 years ago, we assumed Type Moon may never localize any of its visual novels. And now, by the end of this year, we'll have English translations for all of them. Well, if we don't count the eroge versions of Fate Stay Night, the original Tsukihime, or Kagetsu Toya, and Hollow Ataraxia. Well, baby steps, I guess. So right off the bat, as usual with these Type Moon releases, they are not guaranteed. So even if you've read the visual novel before and don't plan to reread it for a while, I encourage you pick this up to show Type Moon your support. But this is a review, not a call to action. So what did I think of this thing? Now, in short, I loved it. In slightly longer terms, I loved it, but some of its death lines do show through. To put it in the longest possible terms, well, prior to this visual novel, my experience at Tsukihime was limited to the atrocious anime adaptation, the decent manga adaptation, Melty Blood Type Lumina, and like 2 minutes of the OG visual novel. So I've always had somewhat of an appreciation for the story and setting, in some ways more so than I do with Fate. While with Fate, a lot of my enjoyment comes from its world and premise, with Tsukihime, the characters and its specific world really steal the show. It's easy to imagine Fate without Shiro. It's much, much harder to imagine Tsukihime without Shiki Tono. Part of what makes this entry so fun is that Tsukihime, compared to Fate, and certainly more than Witch on the Holy Night, is willing to take itself to truly dark places and just stay there. It's got a much darker vibe than any other Type Moon work, even compared to something like Heaven's Feel. It feels just firmly rooted in horror. That's held true for the entire franchise, but if I had any major critiques of the remake, it's that the vibe can sometimes be unceremoniously forgotten in favor of giant, over-the-top battles that would make even the MCU blush. The sheer spectacle was not what I expected. These moments are equal parts hype, as they are kind of distracting. I won't take away from these scenes, they are very well written and usually pretty awesome. But if what you love about this work is its creepier vibes, just be aware this is not the Tsukihime you probably remember. As well, there are new characters here whose story implementation is hard to talk about. We know, generally speaking, how the original cast fits into everything, so when their roles are cut short in a specific route, it's more or less fine. We know that they will turn up later, and at this point, we know what their roles will be if you've spoiled yourself on the old visual novel. Or if you've just read it before. But there are a lot of new characters who don't always feel properly fleshed out. The 3 people who played Melty Blood may recognize Vlav, Mario, and Noel, and they are fleshed out well enough, but the others, who I won't get into here, range from practical non-entities relegated to missable side scenes that just act as sequel bait, to actively kind of intrusive to the story being told and the plot lines left dangling. It's almost jarring, because even with my limited exposure to the content of the original, I can tell the difference between how these new characters are handled versus how the original ones are. The roles of the new ones just feel directionless more often than not. But that's enough poo-pooing. This is still a fantastic story. On more than one occasion, the characters succeeded in making me tear up. Their stories genuinely end up being very hard-hitting. When it wants to get creepy, it does. Especially once you move on to the second route, the psychological horror elements are genuinely disturbing and very unsettling. In some instances, bad ends become truly nightmarish. While I haven't got them all yet, I have seen a handful of them, and one in particular that I learned about earlier today was probably one of the most unsettling things I've seen in a Type Moon work yet. I'll also comment that while not every decision is that impactful, the ones that don't feed into a bad ending can still change scenes up dramatically, really encouraging rereads, which is often helpful given this game's structure. That said, I will now dig into one major real issue I had with it as a visual novel. It is remarkably tedious to get into a new route. Let me explain as spoiler-free as possible. Arcueid's route is the default route, and beating it is required to play the Ciel route. To get into the Ciel route, you need to be kind to Ciel in the opening section and really get to know her. So, fair enough, you can even do this on a first playthrough and then save before you enter the route split. And then just jump back to an old save file. Things get annoying, though, as the route split is not decided by a solitary choice. You are given a choice at one point that seems kind of insignificant, but is telegraphed to be a route split by being grayed out on your first playthrough, and I believe they even tell you that's where you want to pick the different option once you finish the route in what's called a T.H.E Ciel Sensei segment. At that point, you'd think you are now on another route, but progressing will lead you right back into the Arcueid route with the animated intro to it and everything. You then have to make another decision that I don't even remember if it was previously accessible or not, but I don't recall it being locked. It's in a way that makes me imagine this may lead to a bad end if the Ciel route isn't unlocked and its conditions aren't reached. So if you don't know you are still on track to start the Ciel route, you'll probably be confused as to what's going on. Then the game does this again in the Ciel True ending, which is a sub-route split at the end of the Ciel route. Actually accessing this requires an affinity for Arcueid to be high enough, and the easiest way to achieve this is to jump back about 6 in-game days. So I would even say that's about 3-4 hours of reading. So if you didn't achieve this on first playthrough and didn't know to select certain options, and it's not as telegraphed as the Ciel route is for this, you have to go back those 6 days and push through them again. It leads to a bit of a back and forth of scene skipping, so it's just all a bit tedious to pull off, and the game really should have had a skip to next new or branching dialogue option to speed things up if this is how they were going to go about things. That more or less ends any substantive critiques I had, though. I will say I had some performance issues on my Switch during the final battle of the Ciel True ending route, which I'm not sure if that's horrifying or impressive. Either way, it did culminate in the Switch crashing during the end credits. Seriously, what kind of potato console have I been playing on the last 5 years? Really, though, I have a distinct feeling that this may have just been a memory leak issue, as I had it in sleep mode for a lot of the duration of time that I wasn't reading, and rarely exited the game and re-entered. A full reset later, and it was fine. I think I have exhausted my spoiler-free thoughts. Sorry if that came off as negative. It really wasn't meant to be. I actually do love this story. It's just really hard for it to come across in a spoiler-free section. So, I guess at this point, I have no choice but to get into spoilers. We'll go route by route here, so I'll avoid spoiling anything in routes we haven't covered. If you're watching this in chunks, just don't go past any route you haven't completed. So Arcueid's route is the one I had the most exposure to from the original. Still haven't read the visual novel, but it's been adapted both into an anime and manga, the latter of which is alright and the former of which is better passing up on. Due to that, I more or less knew how this story played out, making the changes interesting to experience here. I was kind of unpleasantly surprised by how backseated Ciel ended up being here compared to the original. She appears in the prologue and then will largely disappear till near the very end of the route where she gets her moment helping Shiki. A lot of her scenes mid-route ended up with her being replaced by Noelle, which felt very to me. Noelle and Mario end up taking the majority of her mid-route scenes, which is only like 2 or 3 minutes, but it's enough to really make Ciel something of a non-character here. In general, I feel like most of this route is just really failing to balance its cast. Most people here feel like an absolute afterthought. Even Vlov, despite his cool-ass action scenes, doesn't get much to do other than that. I do appreciate that his characterization makes him very competent, never having that Gilgamesh-style, I'm just gonna underestimate the hero moment. It makes him feel all the more satisfying when Shiki manages to take him down with the plan that he comes up with. And yet, character-wise, we really don't know jack all about him. This route is, for better or worse, hyper-focused on Shiki and Arcueid's relationship. And their relationship is really well handled here. Their dynamic and banter feel genuinely fun to read. While you can still see the faults under the surface, it feels remarkable how much chemistry the two have. But it really does fixate most of the story on them. The big blob action scene is kind of the action peak of this route. Later fights settle into more grounded tones, including the final fight. It's all very appropriate, though, as it simultaneously keeps the relationship equally grounded, which makes it feel all the more tragic when Mario drops the revelation that Art cannot control her vampiric impulses anymore. The entire story has the air of fleetingness to it. A doomed romance that could never actually work out, because Arcueid would inevitably one day suck Shiki's blood. The story really hammers home that while Shiki is willing, Arcueid doesn't want to because she sees how genuinely caring of a person he is underneath the very, very flawed exterior. He'd just not be the same person if she drank his blood and he became a vampire. I'll do a much deeper reading on things later, but I'm of the belief that this story is ultimately an allegory for trauma and abusive relationships. Remember, this entire relationship started with Shiki killing Arcueid, and that's a good chunk of the reason why it's becoming too much for her to avoid drinking his blood. Abuse begets more abuse, and while the two can still love each other, it's obvious they cannot be together and still be able to see the best in each other. With that in mind, Arcueid's final dash to the school to confront Roa while a piano rendition of her Roots anime intro theme plays is just a beautiful scene. She knows it could never be, but still wants to perform one last act of love to protect Shiki. Every time I experience her death in the different mediums, I know it's coming, but it feels almost unfair to everyone involved every time I experience it, and that includes here. You as a reader want them to, despite the odds, make it work. But in the end, it doesn't. Shiki's final fight with Roa left me with chills. The final death of Roa feels satisfying, as if a nightmare is finally over, but only after it interrupted a great dream. Shiki and Arcueid's reunion then feels like it should be happy, but nothing has truly changed. They cannot safely be together now, especially now that Arcueid is even weaker. And unlike the manga adaptation I read, there is no happy searching for Arcueid's castle ending here. No, here it seems to bring with it a sense of finality. Shiki needs to move on now with his life, with an understanding of how fleeting and quick to end the most beautiful things can be. And Art needs to leave to allow herself time to heal, however many eternities that may take. A sad parting that feels like an amicable breakup. I felt genuinely terrible that they had to part despite everything. It's certainly the most openly poetic of the roots. It feels tighter in its themes and easiest to parse. There's more to it that I'll get into once I'm ready to go over the visual novel as a whole and its bigger picture messages. But this individual story here just feels possibly timeless. Arcueid's route is beautiful because it's fleeting, a route which is about when to accept the end. Ciel is fascinating as a character in this visual novel. I'd argue prior to Arcueid's introduction, her dynamic with Shiki is unchallenged as the most endearing of the female cast up to that point. It's crazy to think that you get to watch in real time as she fabricates character history with him, and on first read through, you probably won't even notice that something is off. But if you know the twist or on reread, you'll notice that he just doesn't recognize her at first, which is a stark contrast to literally every interaction they have before the shoe drops as to what's actually going on. And it's also interesting that of the main characters, she is seemingly the first one to be more forward about her feelings. She openly and clearly begins using her amazing riz on Shiki, and you as the reader feel drawn into interacting with her. This is all within the common route, mind you, before her route ever begins, and can even be experienced during your first playthrough for the Arcueid route. Their dynamic is just priceless, even as it becomes clear which elements are real and which elements are fake. I at least noticed that once the fake, friendly face of Ciel gives way to genuine affection, you see less of Ciel purposely rizzing up Shiki and less attempts by her to pacify him, being more open to conflict and more vulnerable to being genuinely hurt by his words. The confrontation between her and Arcueid halfway through the route felt particularly hard-hitting, as that's arguably the point where Shiki burns away at both bridges, and yet Ciel goes so far as to erase memories of her at the school, and then still comes back where she knows Shiki will see her. Wholly unnecessary as a fake action, but for someone genuinely hurt with deep feelings, it makes sense. And yet, Noelle, who I'll just say here has a work-wife relationship with her, insists she's cold and cruel about her exterminations. So, when we finally see the scene of Shiki nearly consumed by Roa's will at his last nerve, and he chooses to reach out to Ciel of all people, and then she's ready to just kill him, we, like him, just cannot believe it, because it isn't true. I'll come back to the climax in a minute. I think an aspect of this story that I appreciated over the Arcueid route was how well the cast was integrated this time. None of the major characters felt left behind, even if they fade to the background. Akiha, for one, has no real character moments here, but her presence is still felt as the Tono family head. Hisui and Kohaku in some ways become a representation of Shiki's normality here, even as they do little in this route. Noelle goes from being Diet Ciel to being a gross reflection of what Ciel could be if she were less focused on atonement and more on vengeance. Noelle's turn to becoming a dead apostle herself makes logical sense, because making others pay is far more important to her than any moral code. The fight with Ciel and Shiki she ends up having feels particularly sad, even as we spent most of the story up to that point horrified by her apparent madness and cruelty. Her death as she burned herself out was another moment that just had me actively crying. Like, God, the moment where Shiki tells Ciel to just apologize to Noelle, even though Noelle is gone. Oh, God, that got me. Even Arcueid, in many ways, feels more complex here than in her own route. In her own route, there's beauty to her discovery of human love. Here it becomes a horror of her stumbling into obsession, and you realize how naive and unexposed to hurt and rejection she really has been. The battle against her as Shiki finally and without room for doubt rejects her is equal parts sad and horrifying. The way she went from trying to save Shiki in her own weird way to trying to murder him and then eventually trying to murder Ciel, it was just utterly terrifying. And that last moment when it looks like Shiki's going to win just to get killed as he succeeds hurts. Arcueid's departure felt like she had a horrific realization on her part of what she had done. And the suicide of Shiki to kill Roa felt like an ending out of a tragedy, which is what made Ciel's sacrifice to save his life even more harsh. Especially because he only has a decade to live, implied by the post-credits scene. Ciel had a full life ahead of her, and she died despite Shiki doing all in his power to save her. Her sacrifice not even buying Shiki that much time, which he just spends trying to bring her back, a mission we more or less know is doomed to fail. It's just heartbreaking. This route had me emotionally devastated by the end. Genuinely, if there was no true ending, I'd probably have gone to sleep and called out of work the next day to process the real emotional damage that had been inflicted on me. Of course, that's not where it ends. True ending was much, much beefier than I thought. It felt like 2 or 3 days worth of content compared to the rest. And I didn't expect it to go nearly as hard as it did. If I thought the Arcueid route vlog fight went a bit over the top, this part puts that to shame. Shiki rejecting Arcueid in a way that is to him not much different, but to her is much more painful, just changed everything. I believe the logic of it is that the previous ending was set up to be a rejection of her idea, her proposal to Shiki to be her servant. The ending here is more of a full rejection of her as a person. Previously, it could be passed off as a blind rage from a less stable body, where the real problem was his killing her again. Here, while he still does that, his words before doing so were more about them not being able to be together, period, and not about her idea to turn him into a vampire. Art's reaction here is nothing short of a temper tantrum. After being pretty well curb-stomped by Ciel and made to beg for her life, as she didn't know what would come after that defeat, she just doesn't die. Instead, she becomes a giant thing called the Lumina, which is basically the full force of her as an ultimate one, slowly changing the Earth as she walks and warping reality around her. And honestly, it's just an incredible moment. I don't think any other Type Moon fight in any medium has been nearly on the scale of this, other than the Orc fight in FGO. The entire thing feels hopeless until the very last minute. And it feels like you are scurrying to prolong an inevitable death. They describe Arcueid as basically a god, her entire abilities bordering on omnipotent. She puts most of the strongest enemies we've fought in the Lost Belt arc of FGO to shame in sheer power. It's so scary, it scared Roa straight. And I truly love my cell phone assistant AI Roa. It's like, I want that in my phone. I want him to be there, ready to treat me like a toddler for not understanding his precise coordinate directions on my map app. It also just serves to give us a great insight into his character, who is otherwise more of a force of nature up to this point. Something I would normally categorize as a metaphor for generational trauma and the collapse of families. But no, here he's a full-on character. So having him more tangibly able to speak with Shiki made for a short but fun dynamic that honestly I wouldn't mind seeing more of. Ciel herself seems to be locked in a near eternal suffering due to losing a fight badly to the Lumina, which leads to Shiki having to save her. There's probably a metaphor there. But back on topic, Arc herself becomes the core of the Lumina, an avatar of her hurt and desire to undo the pain, which results in one really, really lopsided fight that she only loses due to an error in her own judgment that accidentally leads her to inevitable destruction that Shiki could easily get out of with Ciel. But he doesn't want to see her dead, so he effectively sacrifices his life to save her. Something wholly unnecessary, and yet an act that serves as a fitting climax for his character arc. Shiki's final conversation with Arc serves to establish closure for both of them. A friendly parting with a little playful ribbing about how they almost killed each other and ended the world, with the door open to establishing an actual friendship with none of the unhealthy baggage in the future, now that Roa's power has returned to Arcueid. Except then, after she leaves, Shiki collapses. I really love the moment afterwards where Shiki again sits at the line between life and death, seeing pretty much all his friends and family in what would be a purgatory of peace, I guess, or heaven. But he has to choose between the uncertainty of life and a peaceful death. His choosing of the uncertainty of life rewards us with an actual happy ending, with Ciel, both of them getting to live out the rest of their lives now just as they please. Genuinely, this is both beautiful and satisfying as an ending to this story. It feels like the perfect capstone to all of the near side routes and their themes. In many ways, the Ciel true end feels like it's as much about Arcueid as it is to Ciel, and outside of Noelle's death, it feels the most open-ended for all of the characters involved. The other two routes certainly have the better emotional payoff, I think, but this route feels like a light at the end of a very long tunnel. I was able to identify a handful of potential themes within this work. I've already showed my hand in the Arcueid portion of the themes about my ideas of the themes being about abuse and trauma, so we'll come back to that one last, I think. The less obvious one is definitely humanity's relationship with nature. Deep within the pits of Type Moon lore, fans are very aware of the relationship between Gaia and Alaya. One a protective force of the planet and the other of humanity. Arcueid's dialogue with Shiki during their date scene really serves to strip back the separation of humanity from the rest of the natural world. With humanity being dominant, they view themselves as separate from the natural order of things. Arcueid doesn't see it that way, though. The dead apostles, in many ways, act as just another species. There's not usually malice in their feeding on humanity, but rather a sheer necessity in doing so to survive. Arcueid doesn't just hunt any dead apostles. She is not some savior to humanity from their vampire problem. She is a form of justice to her own kind. True ancestors which do not need blood to survive, and instead, it's simply a source of pleasure to them. If we have any comparisons to our modern day, I would liken it to our own laws around animal cruelty and overhunting, We are perfectly fine killing animals for food, but as far as it goes for cruelty, we draw the lines against it, as the loss of animals would be disastrous for even our own paradigm. The only reason at all that Arcueid went after Vlov was because he attacked her for his own gain. We can see major differences in how Arcueid and Ciel interact with Vlov in their own fights. For Arcueid, it's a very detached struggle for survival, and human life is only a factor insofar as Arcueid cares specifically for Shiki's wants and his needs. For Ciel, on the other hand, it's a lot more personal. A desperate preemptive struggle to keep the outside world from harm. And in the case of Roa, it is personal for both Arcueid and Ciel. I say this all to highlight how different of an outlook both heroines have on the nature of a predator of humans. Predator and prey are simply a matter of nature. One humanity deludes itself into thinking they are above. So in Roots, where Shiki has even slightly less of a connection to the Moon Princess, her priorities move much farther away from protecting humanity. Humanity is still holding itself as above it all. Even as she tries to be human in the Ciel route, simulating all of their odd tendencies and flaws, she does not sit perfectly. From her perspective, mankind is a selfish race acting for their own desires, which is what she tries to do. But the reality is that mankind is at least striving to be a united front for its own benefit. I read a line in FGO recently during the interlude for the Artemis Orion Archer Servant. And I think it's a fitting way to describe Arcueid's arc within the Ciel route. The same way humanity can never be gods, gods can never be human. The failures of the Dead Apostle ancestors and Arcueid herself is that they were aiming for the exact opposite goals on that line. One trying to be a god, one trying to be human. Which really does highlight this dynamic, even as the game itself identifies that, stripped back to the core, Arcueid is effectively a goddess of nature. I think thematically, the final confrontation between Shiki and the Lumina in Ciel's true ending serves the same as the fate interpretation of Gilgamesh divorcing humanity from the gods. Right down to the pissed off, scorned goddess lashing out at a lover rejecting her. Arcueid at the end of the day, both figuratively and literally, is nature. She is in Type Moon, named the breath of the planet, and that is the force humanity continues to revere as a universal god. Nature. Humanity cannot help but hurt it as we need it. We cannot help but humanize it, even as it remains out of our reach. We are a part of it, even as we are not. Our relationship with nature is one that cannot ever be fully mended. With Shiki as part of humanity and Arcueid a representation of nature, we see the desperate but futile struggle to escape while also desiring not to see its ruin. Another theme the visual novel touch on is the nature of morality. Morality comes up a lot across both routes. Who is good and who is evil? How does one who is evil repent? What actually is evil? Well, if a lion wanders hungry into a town and eats a family, is that lion evil? Well, probably not. It's a great tragedy, yes, but we respect a level of self-preservation. Humanity is not, in fact, better than the fallen true ancestors that engorged themselves on human blood. We don't just eat animals out of some desperation or necessity. We are blessed to be able to eat plants as well, and yet we cannot help but consume meat often produced through cruel practices for our own pleasure. In-game, this is highlighted as Shiki alone in that conversation is appreciating the fast food burger he and Arcueid are consuming. Arcueid sits there finding it deeply unsatisfying and pointless, and yet, in media we would see vampires and similar monsters as evil, often forces of the devil himself. Are we really that much better? Well, the answer is probably not. We are the horror monster for other species, overrunning their homes, eating them, in some cases boiling them alive. But so in that way, we are all in some shape or form evil, or most of us at least. This is something Ciel says directly in reference to original sin. Every person on the planet has committed some form of sin. But I think Tsukihime very well establishes that this isn't the conversation that needs to be had. As I mentioned before, This is in some ways simply part of nature. Arcueid expresses these concerns, but we know from the text that she herself is a creature who was stripped back of all excess before the start of the story. It's logical she would be able to easily see this flaw in humanity. So instead, Tsukihime, and I would actually argue the rest of Type Moon, looks towards whether or not we fulfill our purpose in nature. And the only answer which seems to fit what our purpose would be is to just be human. This is where we can separate ourselves from monsters. Where Arcueid succeeds at emulating humanity by the end of her own route, where dead apostles fail to be human, is simply their ability to sympathize with others. The humans that are horrific to us are not the ones that fail to live moral lives, but rather the ones that fail to recognize the humanity in others, to understand how pain could drive someone to their own imperfections. I promise you that out of all of the themes in Tsukihime, this is one that I can say for a fact was definitely on Nasu's mind while writing. Because this theme on humanity is one that pervades the entirety of the Nasu-verse. Let's go through a various Type Moon works here real quickly. Garden of Sinners opens with a quote that you can only kill once as a human. Once you have done so, you cease to be human as you no longer recognize your victim as human. Fate's Day Night continually emphasizes that mages are throwing away their humanity, and that Shiro, in trying to save others, is failing to see himself as human. An inversion of Tsukihime for sure. Witch on the Holy Night touches less on the exact human aspect of things, but shows more how much happier Alice and Aoko become once Sojiro enters their lives, and more or less forces them to become more considerate of others' plights and not to undervalue a history unknown to them. Even as recently as Samurai Remnant, you have Iori and everything going on with his final ending, walking a very similar path to Shiro, where he is trying to throw away his own understanding of himself to be a better warrior, and yet fails to be a better warrior due to his inability to understand his opponent. This theme is a constant in Type Moon, and if there's any takeaway from Tsukihime, it should be that. The theme I keyed in on earlier, and the one that may genuinely be off base, but I still love to look at it this way anyways, is the romantic themes of hurt, trauma, and abuse. Vampirism itself being a representation of one who abuses others. I will say in other works, vampirism is often viewed as a representation of sex and the mysterious nature behind it, but when your franchise originates from an eroge, that feels like a non-starter, like perhaps there's another theme, another purpose to the vampirism going on thematically. All abuse, or for Tsukihime, all vampirism, in my opinion, originates from the abuse people undergo by nature. It takes a true ancestor to really start the cycle of humanity becoming dead apostles. In some ways, we can read abuse the same way we read killing in Garden of Sinners. When you abuse someone, you fail to recognize them as human. And once you start abusing people, it becomes harder to stop. This is where our reading of Roa comes in. Roa's original mistake in his plan, the mistake that would ruin him, was seeing Arcueid as human. His mistake in making nature something personal. Roa is the start of this thread of abuse. Roa himself acts almost as a great allegory for generational trauma. Notably, his appearing in families of great influence and power, and usually causing their complete collapse. It's no accident that he is with the Todo family, a family already rife with cold treatment of each other and notable abuse, especially if you know the events of the original Tsukihime. I'm sure many aspects of this dynamic will be more present on the other side of Red Garden, which will likely spend much more time in the mansion. But for the current roots, Roa is simply the ripple effect that led to today. Both heroines, in their own ways, are trying to atone for the harm they brought on the world. Arcueid for unintentionally creating this cycle, and Ciel for her role in propagating it. It's around here that I will say that even divorced from his nature as Roa's host, Shiki is not a great person. Shiki Tono is, at the start of the story, selfish, not thinking twice about leaving his adoptive family, the Arimas. Logically, he has no real means of staying, but he says himself that he does not have it in him to recognize the familial relationship between him and his adoptive family. And the way their parting goes, it's evident that he will be unlikely to visit them, even as it hurts them to lose him. Especially for someone like Miyako, if you've ever seen the Melty Blood lore. It becomes all the more hypocritical then that at various times in the story, he becomes hurt at the possibility of losing Arcueid or Ciel and desperately flails against those burning of those bridges. And then we can't forget to mention his compulsive lying and attempts to twist the truth. Even in an instance where he may try to tell the truth of his activities to Akiha, he tells it in a way that is wholly unbelievable and then at the slightest bit of pushback returns to lying. He is a bit of a lecher too, gazing on women in his life sexually, and with Roa pushing those traits to be even worse. He has come close to assaulting women he cares for in scenes that quickly devolve into uncomfortable. And yet, it's easy to look past these features of Shiki because he is our perspective. And for reasons he fails to consider, the people in his life let it slide. Arcueid here is simply naive to his worst tendencies unless he pushes her too far, causing her to snap and see only those tendencies. Ciel, on the other hand, knows where these tendencies may be coming from, or at least she thinks she does. She correctly identifies some of them as from Roa, but others of which she does not recognize that they're from himself. So through the entirety of her route, she's either staying near him to observe or is running the world's biggest cope that maybe he's not the incarnation of a killer vampire that ruined her life. If you can run that cope, you can probably run the cope of maybe that asshole-ish nature was just a one-time thing he did on a bad day. I can fix him. And finally, Ciel's place in this story is as one who formerly propagated vampirism or abuse and now carries a deep guilt, unsure of how to move on. In many ways, she is the one seeking answers most actively in the story. Her entire arc is on discovering how to move on, to atone enough to soothe her own guilt. Something she incorrectly identifies as only being possible through her own death. A mentality that leads to her creating an unrealistic expectation at the extent she is capable of suffering to assuage her pupil and victim's soul. Noelle is a victim through and through, and while she does become a vampire in this story, it is the horror Ciel as Roa introduced to her life and the betrayal by her fake savior in her hometown that turned her into a monster. She's still human and trying to live a moral life, but somehow she's more detestable than the monster she's trying to stop. Monsters create victims who can then themselves become monsters who can then create more victims. That is Tsukihime's vampiric cycle. These answers to the questions of what happens with abusers and atonement appears to differ between the three different endings, each offering their own unique perspective. Arcueid in her route is forced to face the reality that she is too unstable to maintain a healthy relationship with Shiki. She will one day feed on, abuse, Shiki. And doing so would ruin who she fell in love with. We see her nearly hit this point in Ciel's normal ending, serving as a horrifying what-if story for her, where she tries to change Shiki by hurting him, and when rejected, she lashes out. And yet she still loves him in both routes. Within her route, her final attempt to stop Roa is an act of love to protect Shiki, one she knows won't save their relationship, but purely the last act of love she can give him before they need to part. Read that as breakup. The answer to this theme in Arcueid's route is that some relationships simply can't work, but the love was neither fake nor valueless. Appreciate the fleeting moments of it, but never compromise what made it special before it needs to end. Ciel's normal route, then, can be read similarly tragic but beautiful. Ciel's normal ending concludes with Shiki killing himself and Roa with him, just for Ciel to revive and die herself. Shiki then spends his foreseeable future searching for a way to bring her back. It's not the most hopeful ending, but Shiki holds on to hope nonetheless. In this allegory, I'd identify the death of Shiki as Shiki making an active effort to change himself. What we see here is a relationship forced to end due to Shiki's own abusive tendencies, but one that may one day rekindle in the future in a way that neither can be guaranteed nor expected. Our last ending is technically a Ciel ending, but it also serves as an alternate Arcueid ending at the same time, as it deals directly to resolve both their arcs with Shiki with two different answers in one story. With Ciel, we know that Shiki is the potentially abusive one in that relationship. However, instead of changing himself, what he does is what I can only describe as the Google Assistant version of going to therapy. He doesn't change himself as much as he works to understand himself, or in the literal story, understand Roa's goals, and seeks the healthiest ways to achieve them instead of conditioning himself to reject them. This allows his existing relationship with Ciel to continue onwards. Reed not dying. He's changed. Still part vampire, not perfectly healthy, but it's a place where Ciel and Shiki can be much happier and they can live much healthier and work towards the future together. It's a bit unfortunate, then, at least, that in A Piece of Blue Glass Moon, Shiki and Arcueid do not have an ending where they work out as a couple. Arcueid and Shiki's relationship in Ciel's route is still unhealthy on Arcueid's side, and here, unlike with the normal ending, Shiki rejects her not for her vision of the future, but for her as a person. Shiki just doesn't have that same love for her as he does Ciel. The result is a complete dehumanization, which you will remember from previous analysis is an inability to understand. Here she ceases being able to see Shiki as more than an annoying ant, and Ciel as an object of her frustration. Shiki has the option of letting her die permanently, an option I would equate to forcibly cutting her off, but in this route he's able to recognize her as human still, to understand her frustrations and cut through them. And in the end, they're able to have a healthy argument about it, ultimately maintaining that bridge, but firmly recognizing their incompatibility. This leads to something of a similar paradigm between Shiki and Arcueid that he and Ciel shared in Ciel's normal ending, just without the dying part. A parting that could be for good, but may not be forever. Even if their future dynamic is not the same as it was before, it might rekindle in the future. So yes, I just equated the Ciel true ending to group therapy. You're welcome, Internet. Final thoughts. Oh my god, I'm finally at the ending here. Genuinely, I thought I may never make it here. I can say with certainty that I am glad that I experienced Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon. I only spent the equivalent of a week's time to complete all the routes, and yet I feel like I have been with these characters for a freaking lifetime. Despite the story being about monsters and vampires, these characters felt distinctly human and its themes hard-hitting. But just as with Witch on the Holy Night, I find myself casting my eyes to the future of this series. I'm now with the rabid hordes of fans waiting for Nasu to release The Other Side of Red Garden, however long into the future that may be. But beyond that, I just want to see these characters again. The Witch on the Holy Night collab did so much to satisfy a similar craving for that work, but now I want to see more on Tsukihime as well. I don't care if it's a new Melty Blood content, new manga, light novels, or even an FGO tie-in. I think this work is very flexible. The future could exist in many mediums, but this is the type of story that excels at using its own visual novel medium to convey its themes and give its characters a chance to breathe. If I were a longer time fan of the series, I feel like this level of possibility would just give me hope into the future of this sub-franchise. The release of this remake worldwide feels like a step towards the future of Type Moon, one where they can actually have their works accessible, and perhaps we'll get to see a much fuller picture in the English-speaking community. And I'm kind of here for it. I'm looking forward to that future more and more. So I did not script the ending here. I'll be honest. That's where my review cuts off. If you look at the doc, this part's not written there. All I gotta say is go buy this visual novel. Oh my god, people, support Type Moon. We need more translations like this. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, other than supporting Type Moon, if you're new here, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. So yeah, guys, I will see you next time. Bye.